"What the hell, I have sent you $5,000 every damn month," my grandpa said in front of everyone. When I asked, "What are you talking about?" his lawyer showed me the bank transfer records from the past 5 years. My parents' and sisters' faces turned bright red. I am Aaliyah King, 32 years old, and I thought I knew what betrayal felt like until the morning my own parents kicked me onto the street. It started with a pounding on my apartment door at 6 in the morning on a Sunday. The kind of aggressive knocking that makes your heart stop because you think the building is on fire or the police are raiding the wrong unit. I stumbled out of bed, my eyes barely open, pulling my robe tight around me, trying to make sense of the chaos interrupting. The one day I got to sleep past dawn. I unlocked the deadbolt and the door flew open, slamming against the wall. Standing there were my parents, Desmond and Latoya King, dressed in their Sunday best for church, but wearing expressions of pure disdain. Before I could even ask what was wrong, my mother hurled a heavy black garbage bag at me. It struck me in the chest with a thud, spilling my own clothes onto the floor. Clothes she must have grabbed from the hall closet while I was sleeping. Or maybe she brought them. I was too stunned to process the logistics. "You have 2 hours to get the hell out of here," my mother spat, stepping over the clothes like they were trash. She marched into the living room and started pulling my books off the shelves, throwing them into a pile. "Bianca and Brad need this apartment starting next month. They are trying for a baby and they need a nursery. This location is perfect for them, and frankly, it is wasted on you." I stood there frozen, clutching the garbage bag. My sister Bianca was 29, the golden child who spent her days posting lifestyle content and her nights spending money she never earned. Brad was her husband, a finance guy who looked at me like I was the help. "You cannot be serious, Mom." I stammered, my voice thick with sleep and panic. "I just transferred the rent to Dad yesterday." $2,000. It was half my paycheck. My father Desmond stepped forward, his expensive cologne filling the small entryway. He laughed, a dry, cruel sound that made my skin crawl. That money was not rent. "Aaliyah, that was the fee for carrying the King name. Consider it back payment for the disappointment of having a daughter who is a glorified line cook instead of a doctor. You are 32 years old, driving a rust bucket and smelling like onions. It is time you went to live where people like you belong. The Lower East Side has plenty of vacancies. But we had a deal." I pleaded, tears stinging my eyes. "You said if I paid the rent, I could stay here until I saved for a down payment. I have nowhere to go." "Dad?" "That sounds like a you problem," my father said, checking his Rolex. "Get moving. If you are not gone by 8, I am calling building security to throw your junk on the curb. And do not you dare show up at church crying. We have a reputation to maintain." The cruelty was so casual, so practiced. It was not just an eviction, it was an execution of my dignity. I watched my mother sweep my framed culinary degree off the wall and toss it into the trash bag, like it meant nothing. In their eyes, I was nothing, just a placeholder, until the golden child needed more space. I dragged my 2 suitcases and 3 boxes of hastily packed belongings into the hallway. Exactly 2 hours later, the smart lock on the door clicked shut behind me, with a finality that echoed in the empty corridor. I heard the distinct beep of the electronic keypad being reprogrammed from the inside. My father was wasting no time erasing my access, ensuring I could not even get back in for a forgotten toothbrush. I stood there under the buzzing fluorescent lights, feeling like an intruder in the place I had called home for 5 years. My hands were raw from frantically shoving clothes into bags, and my face was sticky with dried tears. "Mr. Henderson, though." "Mr. Building manager turned the corner, holding his clipboard and a ring of keys. He stopped dead when he saw me sitting on my suitcase, surrounded by trash bags of my possessions. "Miss King, are you moving out?" he asked, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "I thought your lease was indefinite. I just saw your father last week, and he mentioned you would be here for the long haul." I tried to smile, but my face crumpled into a grimace. "My parents need the apartment back for my sister," I stammered, humiliated that he was seeing me like this. "I am just..." I am leaving now. They said the sublet agreement was over. Mr. Henderson looked at his clipboard, then back at me with a strange expression. Sublet agreement. Miss King. There seems to be a serious misunderstanding. Your parents do not sublet this unit to you. They own it outright. They bought it with cash 5 years ago under the King Family Trust. Listing you as the tenant was just a formality for the HOA records, so you could receive packages. I froze. The hallway seemed to spin. The air conditioning vent above me blasted cold air, but I suddenly felt feverishly hot. They own it, I whispered, my voice trembling, but they told me they were renting it from a friend. They told me the rent was $2,000 a month because they negotiated a family discount for me. Mr. Henderson shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. He lowered his voice, as if sharing a dirty secret. Miss King, when they bought this unit 5 years ago, the market rate for a 1-bedroom in this building was maybe $1,200. It is higher now, of course, but if they were charging you $2,000... He trailed off, doing the mental math that I was currently screaming in my head. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had been paying them nearly double the market rate for 5 years. I quickly did the calculation in my head. $2,000 a month for 60 months. That was $120,000. I had paid them over $100,000 thinking I was barely covering the cost of living in a nice place. Thinking I was lucky they helped me secure it. The realization hit me harder than the garbage bag my mother had thrown. I had been eating ramen noodles and working double shifts at the restaurant, standing on my feet for 14 hours a day. Just to make that rent payment, I had sacrificed buying new shoes, dental checkups, and any semblance of a social life, to ensure I never missed the first of the month. And all that time, the money wasn't going to a landlord. It was going directly into my parents' pockets. Pure profit. I wasn't the burden they claimed I was. I was their passive income stream. I had been financing their country club memberships and Bianca's designer handbags with my sweat and burnt fingers, while they looked me in the eye and told me I was a failure who couldn't stand on her own 2 feet. They had monetized my guilt and exploited my trust, turning their own daughter into a tenant. They could overcharge and then evict on a whim. The nausea rose in my throat, violent and overwhelming. I wasn't just the black sheep of the family. I was the cash cow they milked while calling me useless. By late afternoon, I had secured the only thing my empty bank account could afford: a basement studio in the southside with barred windows, and a landlord who demanded cash up front for the key. The place smelled of mildew and despair, dampness clinging to the peeling wallpaper like a second skin. I dragged my suitcases across the warped linoleum floor, fighting the urge to vomit. This was my reality now, homeless in the morning and living in a fire hazard by sunset, all because my parents decided I had served my purpose as their revenue stream and evicted me like a squatter. I slumped against the cold wall, sliding down until I hit the floor. My phone vibrated in my hand. A notification from Instagram flashed across the cracked screen. Bianca King is live. I knew I should ignore it. I knew it would only bring pain, but my thumb hovered and clicked. Before my brain could stop it, the screen filled with blinding natural light, the light from my old apartment, the apartment I had paid for with sweat and burns for 5 years. "Hey guys, welcome back to the channel," Bianca chirped, her face glowing with ring light perfection, holding up a faro and ball paint deck. "We are officially starting the renovation on the new investment property. Mom and Dad gifted us. Can you believe this space?" She spun around the camera, panning across the living room where my books had been just hours ago. "I am turning this entire second bedroom into a custom walk-in closet for my Hermes collection. Because priorities, right? We need to maximize the space before the baby comes. Thank you, Mommy and Daddy, for the early wedding gift. You guys are literally the best." I watched as hearts and fire emojis floated up the screen, validating her theft. Validating my erasure? She walked over to the window, the spot where I used to drink my morning coffee before my shifts, and pointed at The view, I am thinking, marble floors and gold fixtures. We need to elevate the energy in here. It felt so heavy before. And then I saw the comment pinned at the top from Brad the Chad. My stomach turned over. Brad, my sister's fiancé, the man who had never worked a physical job in his life, but judged me for mine. There it was in black and white for all their followers to see. Finally got rid of that cheap grease smell out of the house. Now it smells like success, baby. The grease smell. He was talking about me. About the scent of hard work, and culinary school, and 14-hour shifts that paid for the very floor he was standing on. He was mocking the labor that had subsidized his fiancé's lifestyle. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold rage harden in my stomach. They weren't just happy. I was gone. They were dancing on my grave while I sat in the dark, listening to sirens wail outside a window. I was too afraid to open. They thought they had buried me in this slum, but they forgot that I was a seed and I was about to grow into their worst nightmare. Monday morning broke with a gray, oppressive drizzle that seemed determined to wash away whatever resolve I had left. The commute from my new apartment in the south side to the restaurant downtown was a navigational nightmare, avoiding potholes that could swallow my 2005 Honda Civic whole. I gripped the steering wheel, the leather cracked and peeling under my fingers, praying the check engine light would stop its ominous blinking just for today. The car was a relic, a hand-me-down. I had bought from a cousin years ago, and it smelled of old oil and desperation. I merged onto the I-94, the traffic crawling at a snail's pace. Suddenly the engine gave a violent shudder, a death rattle that vibrated through my entire body before falling silent. The power steering locked up and I barely managed to wrestle the heavy metal beast onto the narrow shoulder as horns blared around me. Semi-trucks shaking the small frame of my car as they roared past. I turned the key. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. Just the hollow click of a starter that had finally given up the ghost. Panic clawed at my throat. I was going to be late. Chef Marco ran his kitchen with military precision. Tardiness was a cardinal sin, punishable by wage theft or termination. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling, not from the cold but from the sheer weight of helplessness staring at my contacts list. My finger hovered over my father's number. It was a reflex, a childhood instinct that survived even the brutality of yesterday's eviction. Surely if I was stranded on a dangerous highway, he would care. He was my father after all. I dialed. The phone rang 4 times before he picked up. "Dad," I said, my voice tight with fear. "I am stranded on the expressway. The Honda died. I am miles from work and it is not safe here. Can you please come get me or send a tow truck? I do not have the money for one right now." There was a pause, and in the background I heard the polished echo of a showroom floor and the murmur of polite laughter. "I am a little busy right now." "Aaliyah," he said, his voice smooth and untroubled, devoid of any urgency. "I am at the dealership with Bianca. We are finalizing the paperwork on her new G-Wagon. She needs something reliable for the baby, and this Mercedes is top of the line." The words hit me like a physical blow. I was stranded on the shoulder of a highway in a death trap while he was signing papers for a 6-figure luxury SUV for my sister Dad. "Please," I whispered, "I am scared. You are 32 years old." "Aaliyah," he snapped, his tone shifting instantly from dismissive to cold. "Stop acting like a child. You wanted to live your own life with your little cooking job, so live it. Do not call me looking for a handout because you cannot manage your assets. Figure it out yourself and stop trying to be a leech on this family." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, the screen going black, reflecting my own shocked face. "Figure it out. Fine." I slammed the steering wheel once, screaming in frustration before grabbing my knife roll and chef coat. I locked the car, abandoning it there like the piece of junk it was, and started walking. 5 miles. I walked 5 miles along the debris-strewn shoulder of the highway, cars splashing dirty slush onto my legs, as they sped by. The wind cut through my thin jacket, biting at my skin. My work shoes cheap. Non-slip clogs offered zero support, and by mile 2, my heels were bleeding. By mile 4, I had stopped feeling my toes entirely. I arrived at Le Jardin, 45 minutes late, soaking wet and shivering, my hair plastered to my skull. Chef Marco did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask why I was wet or why I was limping. He just looked at the clock and then at me with cold indifference. "You are late, King," he barked, slamming a ticket on the pass. "That is an hour docked from your pay, and you are on the dish pit tonight until close. Scrub the grease traps, too. Maybe that will teach you to respect my time." I nodded wordlessly, tying my apron over my damp clothes. My father bought my sister a Mercedes today, and I lost an hour of minimum wage because I had to walk in the rain. I scrubbed dishes until my hands were raw, the hot water scalding my skin, fueling the fire of rage that was slowly replacing my grief. 2 days later, a text from my mother flashed across my screen. It was not an apology for leaving me stranded on the highway or a check-in to see if I was still alive. It was a summons attendance at Bianca's. Early birthday celebration was mandatory. My father still held the title to my dead car, and I knew if I did not show up, he would sign it over to a scrapyard just to teach me a lesson about responsibility. So I spent my last $10 on a bus ticket and headed back to the house that used to be my home. The house was glowing like a lantern in the dark. Manicured lawn, perfectly edged, expensive cars lining the driveway like a luxury dealership showroom. I walked up the driveway trying to smooth the wrinkles in my dress. It was the only nice thing I had left that had not been ruined by the rain or the move. But it was 3 years old and felt threadbare compared to the silk and velvet I saw through the windows. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, hoping to blend into the wallpaper. The living room was packed with my parents, friends, people from the church, and Brad. As finance colleagues. Waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Bianca was in the center of the room, wearing a shimmering gold dress that caught every light, laughing as she held court. I tried to skirt the edge of the room, heading for the kitchen to hide, but Brad spotted me. His eyes didn't meet mine. Instead, they dropped immediately to the floor to my feet. My shoes were the undeniable casualties of my 5-mile walk along the highway. The black leather was scuffed raw at the toes, revealing the gray composite underneath, and the right heel was worn down to a dangerous angle. I had colored the scuffs with the permanent marker, hoping no one would notice in the dim light. But Brad's gaze was like a spotlight. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Brad announced, his voice booming over the soft jazz music. The conversation in the room died instantly as heads turned toward us. He walked over to me, a cruel smirk twisting his face, stopping just close enough to invade my personal space. "Aaliyah, I know times are tough in the kitchen, but did you have to wear your gardening shoes to my wife's party? You are scratching the hardwood." I felt the blood rush to my face, burning my skin. "I am sorry, Brad," I stammered instinctively, stepping back trying to hide my feet behind a potted plant. My car broke down and I had to walk. He laughed, a sharp barking sound that made me flinch. "Walked? Did you walk through a landfill?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. The leather was thick with cash. He peeled off a $20 bill and crumpled it into a ball, then tossed it at me. It hit my chest and fell to the floor, landing right next to my ruined shoes. "Here, go get a shine," he sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do not embarrass my wife with your poverty." It is pathetic. I stood frozen, the humiliation rooting me to the spot. I looked up, searching for my mother, needing her to step in to tell him he had gone too far. She was standing right behind him, sipping her wine, watching the scene unfold with a look of mild amusement. She didn't look angry at him. She looked embarrassed by me. "Oh, Brad, do not waste your money," my mother said, her voice light and airy, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "She is used to living in filth by now." You cannot help someone who enjoys wallowing in the mud. Just ignore her. She is just the help tonight anyway. The laughter that rippled through the room was the sound of my soul breaking. My own mother had just given a room full of strangers permission to treat me like garbage. I looked down at the crumpled $20 bill on the floor and realized with a sickening clarity that to them I was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Bianca's grip on my upper arm was like a vice as she dragged me away from the laughing crowd and into the kitchen. The swinging door shut behind us, cutting off the noise of the party and leaving us in the sudden sterile silence of the prep area. I rubbed my arm expecting an apology or at least an acknowledgement that her husband was a monster. Instead, Bianca turned to me with a look of frantic annoyance, wiping a smudge of lipstick from her teeth. "Thank God you are here," she huffed, ignoring my tear-filled eyes. "This is a disaster," Chef Laurent just texted and said he has food poisoning. He is not coming, and the main course is sitting in the fridge half-prepped. I need you to take over immediately. I stared at her, unable to comprehend the audacity. "You want me to cook?" I asked, my voice hollow. "You just watched your husband throw money at me like I was a stripper, and you want me to cook his dinner." Bianca rolled her eyes, making a shooing motion with her hands. "Oh, get over it, Aaliyah. Brad is just stressed about the baby. And honestly, you did look ridiculous walking in here with those shoes, but we do not have time for a pity party. I have 50 guests expecting a 5-star meal, and you are a sous chef. This is literally the only thing you are good at, so make yourself useful for once." I felt a surge of adrenaline, hot and sharp. "No," I said, stepping back toward the door. "I am not your employee, Bianca. I am your sister. Or I was supposed to be. I am leaving. Do not call me again." I turned to push through the door, but Bianca's voice stopped me cold, sharp as a whip crack. "If you walk out that door, I am texting Dad to cut your health insurance right now." I froze. My hand hovered over the doorframe. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt very thin. I turned back slowly. My health insurance was tied to a ghost position at my father's company, a loophole he had kept open for years, not out of kindness but as a leash. It was the only way I could afford my asthma medication and the therapy I needed to deal with them. "You wouldn't," I whispered. "Try me," Bianca hissed, holding up her phone, her thumb hovering over a contact. "Dad is already looking for a reason to cut costs, now that he is buying the baby a nursery. If I tell him you ruined my birthday party, he will cancel your policy before you even get to the bus stop. Do you have $600 a month for premiums? Aaliyah, because looking at your shoes, I doubt you have $6. The trap snapped shut. She knew she had me. She knew I was one medical emergency away from bankruptcy. She smiled, a cold, victorious smile that looked exactly like our mother's, and pointed to the chef's apron hanging on the pantry hook. "Get to work. The guests are hungry and try not to sweat in the food." I stood there for a long moment, the humiliation burning in my throat like acid. Then slowly, I walked over and took the apron. It was stark white, stiff with starch. I tied it over my dress, the only nice dress I owned, covering the last shred of my dignity. I walked to the sink and washed my hands, scrubbing until my skin was red, staring at my reflection in the window. I wasn't a sister or a daughter to them. I was a resource, a tool to be used until it broke. I spent the next 3 hours sweating over a hot stove, plating filet mignon and truffle risotto for people who wouldn't even look me in the eye. When I walked out into the dining room carrying the heavy silver trays, I became invisible. My parents took the credit, accepting compliments on the food while I refilled their wine glasses. Brad didn't even look up as he took a piece of steak from the platter I held, telling the man next to him that success is all about knowing how to delegate. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood, serving the people who were eating me alive. I was elbow-deep in scalding, soapy water, scrubbing the crusted truffle risotto off a Le Creuset pot that cost more than my entire life savings. The sounds of the party drifted Through the swinging door, laughter, clinking glasses, and the murmur of congratulations for the happy couple. My back ached from 3 hours of cooking and serving, and my feet were throbbing in the cheap shoes Brad had mocked earlier. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, invisible until someone needed something cleaned or refilled. My phone vibrated violently against the marble countertop, startling me. It was sitting next to a pile of dirty silverware. Screen facing up. I almost ignored it, assuming it was my landlord demanding the cash for the key, or maybe Chef Marco firing me for being late this morning. But the name flashing on the screen made my heart stop. Pop Grandpa Elijah lived in Florida, and I hadn't seen him in 5 years. My parents always told me he was too frail for visitors, or that he was disappointed in my career choices and didn't want to be disturbed. I stared at the notification, wiping my wet hands on the dirty apron. The message preview was long. Hey baby girl, booking my flight to Chicago for next Tuesday. Cannot wait to see the returns on our 5-year plan. Finally coming to collect my hug and get a VIP table at your restaurant. Hope business is booming. Love, Pop. I read the text 3 times, my breath hitching in my throat. Your restaurant returns on our 5-year plan. What on earth was he talking about? I didn't own a restaurant. I was a glorified line cook who just got evicted from a fake rental apartment. Was he confused? My parents always said his mind was slipping. Maybe this was proof. Panic, cold, and sharp spiked in my chest. If he came here expecting to see a success story and found me living in a basement and scrubbing dishes for my abusive family, the disappointment would kill him, or worse, he would see me as the failure my mother always said I was. I snatched the phone up and dialed his number immediately. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. It rang once, twice, 3 times steadily, echoing in my ear while I paced the small kitchen, praying he would pick up. Come on, Pop, answer, I whispered, watching the kitchen door. Terrified Bianca would walk in and catch me on the phone. The line clicked, and for a second I thought he answered, but it was just his voicemail greeting, rough and warm. You have reached Elijah King. I am probably fishing or counting my money. Leave a message. I hung up without speaking. My mind was racing. A 5-year plan. He spoke about it like it was a business deal we had made, but I had never made a deal with him. The last time we spoke was right before I moved into the apartment my parents rented to me. He had just wished me luck and told me to work hard. A horrible sinking feeling settled in my gut. My parents had lied to me about the apartment. They had lied about the rent. They had lied about everything. What if they had lied to him too? What if this investment he was talking about was the missing piece of the puzzle? The money I never saw, the success I never had. I looked down at the text again. Tuesday, that was in 2 days. He was coming here, and I had absolutely no idea what I was walking into. All I knew was that my parents had built a house of cards and Pop was the wind that was about to blow it all down. The kitchen doors swung open with a violence that made me jump. Dropping my phone onto the counter, my parents rushed in and the look on their faces stopped the blood in my veins. They were not smug anymore. They were not laughing. They looked like they had seen a ghost. My father, Desmond's face was an ashy gray, and my mother, Latoya, was trembling so hard her diamond earrings were vibrating. Did you get the text? My father demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. He waved his phone at me, eyes wild. Pop is coming here Tuesday. I nodded slowly, backing away until my hips hit the sink, expecting them to yell at me for inviting him. But they were not looking at me with anger. They were looking at me with desperation. My mother lunged forward, gripping my shoulders with painful force, her nails dug into my skin through the thin fabric of the chef coat. Listen to me, Aaliyah. She hissed, her breath coming in short, panic-stricken gasps. When he gets here, you are going to lie. You are going to lie like your life depends on it, because ours certainly does. You are going to tell him that you own this restaurant. Not that you are scrubbing pots in the back. You are going to tell him that you are still living in the penthouse and that business is booming. Do not say a word about the eviction or the debt, or the fact that you are a glorified line cook. Do you hear me? I stared at her, horrified, pulling back from her claw-like grip. Why? I asked, my voice shaking. Why do I have to lie to him? He just wants to see me. He loves me, because if he finds out the truth, he will cut us off. My father stepped in, looming over me, his eyes cold and hard. He thinks you are a success, Aaliyah. He thinks the money he has been sending was used to build an empire. If he finds out you are a failure who squandered her potential, he will stop the transfers. He will cut the family trust, and we will lose everything because of you. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The transfers. What transfers? I had never received a dime from them that was not accompanied by a lecture or a bill. But before I could ask, my father grabbed my chin, forcing me to look him in the eye. If you blow this for us, if you tell him one single thing about your pathetic reality, I will destroy you, he threatened, his voice low and terrifying. I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will cut your health insurance tonight, and I will disown you for real this time. You will be dead to us. Do not test me, girl. You play the part of the successful restaurateur, or you lose the only family you have left. He released me with a shove, and I stumbled back against the counter, watching them storm out of the kitchen as quickly as they had entered. They left me standing there, surrounded by dirty dishes, and the smell of fear, realizing that my entire life was about to become a stage play, written by the people who hated me the most. And my grandfather was the unsuspecting audience they were desperate to fool. The living room, where I had been publicly humiliated just 48 hours prior, was now transformed into a dressing room for the most expensive lie of my life. My mother, Latoya, shoved a heavy garment bag into my chest with enough force to make me stumble. Go to the powder room and put this on, she commanded, checking her watch as if she were running a military operation. And fix your hair. You look like you have been sleeping under a bridge. I wanted to scream that I basically was sleeping under a bridge thanks to them, but the memory of my father's threat about my health insurance kept my mouth shut. I unzipped the bag, revealing a cream-colored Saint Laurent power suit that likely cost more than my entire culinary school tuition. It was beautiful, stark, and completely unlike anything I would ever wear. It felt heavy in my hands, like armor that did not belong to me. When I stepped back into the living room, wearing the suit, my father was pacing back and forth, holding a stack of index cards. He stopped and looked me up and down critically. "It will have to do," he muttered. "Though the pants are a bit short. At least you look like you sign checks now instead of washing dishes." He thrust the index cards at me. "Memorize these immediately. Your restaurant is called the Phoenix. You opened it 3 years ago. Your profit margins are steady at 20%, and you just hired a sommelier from France. If he asks about the menu, tell him you are focusing on fusion cuisine. Do not stutter and do not look down." I flipped through the cards, my stomach churning. It was a complete fabrication, a detailed backstory for a life I did not have. "Why are we doing this, Dad?" I asked quietly, grip tightening on the cards. "Why can't I just tell him I am working hard? Why does it have to be this lie? Because hard work does not pay for Bianca's lifestyle," my father snapped, snapping his fingers near my face. "Focus, Aaliyah. He is coming tomorrow." From the plush velvet armchair, Bianca watched the performance with a bowl of grapes in her lap, looking like a queen observing a court jester. She let out a sharp, cruel laugh that grated on my nerves. "Look at you," she sneered, standing up and circling me. Her eyes were full of mockery as she tugged on the lapel of the jacket. "You look ridiculous," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You look like a penguin trying to learn how to fly. No amount of expensive fabric is going to hide the fact that you are awkward and desperate. But honestly, I do not care how stupid you look as long as you are convincing." She leaned in close, her breath smelling of expensive mints. "Listen to me very carefully, sis. My inheritance is riding on this performance. Pop controls the big trust, and if he thinks his precious investment failed, he turns off the tap. So you better act like the boss. bitch he thinks you are, because if I lose my money, because you cannot remember a lie, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life. I looked at my sister, the golden child who needed me to lie to fund her future, and felt a cold resolve settle over me. I would wear the suit, I would memorize the cards, but I was starting to realize that the only person in this room who actually had any power was the one they were all terrified of. My grandfather, and he was coming to see me. Not them. Tuesday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. We were lined up in the driveway like a firing squad awaiting inspection. My father Desmond was pacing, adjusting his silk tie every 3 seconds, while my mother Latoya was frantically smoothing invisible wrinkles on Bianca's dress. I stood a little apart, encased in the stiff cream suit that felt less like clothing and more like a straitjacket. My heart was doing somersaults in my chest. If Pop saw through this charade, my life was effectively over and I would be back on the street without even a car to sleep in. We expected a black town car, or maybe a luxury SUV service. What turned the corner was a rattling yellow taxi with a dented fender and a muffler that sounded like it was coughing up a lung. It pulled into the pristine circular driveway, leaking a drop of oil onto the pavers my father paid thousands to maintain. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls, her face horrified. "Why is he in a cab?" she hissed under her breath. "We sent the private driver for him." The taxi door opened and Elijah King stepped out. He did not look like the multimillionaire magnate who owned a logistics empire. He looked like the truck driver he used to be. He was wearing a simple plaid button-down, tucked into khaki pants, and comfortable walking shoes that had seen better days. He carried his own duffel bag, waving off the driver's offer to help. He looked solid, real, and completely out of place. In this tableau of pretension my parents had staged. Pop Bianca squealed, launching herself forward with a practiced smile, ready to play the doting granddaughter. He gave her a polite pat on the back, his eyes already scanning over her shoulder, searching. When his gaze landed on me, his whole face transformed. The lines of age seemed to smooth out, and a genuine warmth flooded his expression. "There she is," he boomed, bypassing my father, outstretched hand to stride right up to me. "Aaliyah, baby girl." He pulled me into a bear hug that smelled of peppermint and Old Spice, the scent of my childhood summers. For a second, the fear melted away. I wasn't the failure or the fraud. I was just his granddaughter. I squeezed him back, burying my face in his shoulder, fighting the urge to sob and tell him everything, right then and there. "Let me look at you," he said, pulling back but keeping a firm grip on my hands. He stepped back to take in the expensive suit, the professional hair and makeup. "You look sharp," he said, but his tone had a question mark at the end of it, like a boss lady. Then he down. He was still holding my hands and he turned them over, palms up. The silence that followed was deafening to me. The suit could hide my poverty, but it could not hide my hands. My palms were rough, calloused from years of gripping knife handles and scrubbing steel wool. My knuckles were swollen from the cold and manual labor, and worst of all were the burns. A fresh, angry red line across my thumb from a sheet pan yesterday. Older silvery scars from hot oil splashes decorating my wrists like a map of my suffering. His thumb traced the callus on my palm, rough skin against rough skin. He knew what hard work felt like. He had driven trucks for 30 years before he bought his first fleet. He looked from my scarred, battered hands to the pristine white cuffs of the Saint Laurent jacket. His eyes narrowed just a fraction, a flicker of calculation passing behind them. "You have got working hands, baby girl," he said softly, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Strong hands, just like mine." My breath hitched. I opened my mouth to lie, to recite the script about managing the restaurant floor, but the words stuck in my throat. He looked up, meeting my eyes with a piercing intensity that made me feel like he was reading my soul. He didn't say anything else, didn't call me out, but as he turned to finally greet my sweating father, I saw a shadow cross his face. Pop had seen the one thing my parents had forgotten to cover up, and I knew in that moment that the game had already changed. The private dining room at Le Jardin was a glass-walled aquarium of opulence usually reserved for senators and tech moguls. Tonight, it was the stage for the most expensive fraud my family had ever committed. My father had dropped $5,000 just to reserve the space for 3 hours, bribing the general manager to let us play. Pretend. I sat at the head of the table in my stiff cream suit, feeling the sweat trickle down my back. Every time a waiter walked in, I knew them all. That was Marcus pouring the water. I had shared a cigarette with him in the alley just yesterday while we complained about rent. Now he was looking at me with wide, confused eyes, trying to figure out why the dishwasher girl was sitting in the power seat. My mother Latoya was in her element, gesturing grandly at the velvet drapes and crystal chandeliers. "Look at what she has built! Pop," she crowed, her voice pitching high with nerves. "Aaliyah has such an eye for detail, doesn't she? Every fixture, every plate chosen by her, it is the talk of the city." Grandpa Elijah sat to my right, looking out of place, but entirely comfortable. He ran a hand over the linen tablecloth, his eyes scanning the room, not with awe, but with the sharp calculation of a man who knew the cost of things. "Is that so?" he rumbled, looking at me. "You picked the drapes, baby girl." I swallowed hard, reaching for my water glass. "Yes. Pop," I lied, the words tasting like ash. I wanted to create an atmosphere of luxury. He hummed non-committally, turning his attention to the menu. Meanwhile, Brad was snapping his fingers at a busboy, treating the staff I worked with every day like they were invisible furniture. He leaned back in his chair, the very picture of unearned confidence, and beckoned the sommelier over. "We need wine for the table," Brad announced loudly, scanning the wine list with a bored expression. "Something red, something robust to go with the steak." The sommelier, a man named Jean-Pierre who had once given me a free bottle of Bordeaux on my birthday, looked at me for a split second before turning his professional mask to Brad. "Very good, sir. May I suggest the Chateau Margaux? It is exceptional this year." Brad waved a hand dismissively, glancing at Grandpa Elijah, who was busy adjusting his napkin, leaning in close to Jean-Pierre. Brad lowered his voice to a stage whisper that carried perfectly across the silent table. "Do not waste the good stuff on us, pal. Just bring the house red. The cheapest one you have got in a nice bottle. The old man has not got the palate. For anything over $20. He would not know the difference between vinegar and vintage. Just keep the bill down." My breath stopped. I looked at Grandpa Elijah, terrified. He had paused mid-motion, his hand freezing on his fork. For a second his eyes flashed with a cold, hard intelligence that made him look dangerous. But then just as quickly, the mask slipped back into place. He blinked confusedly and cupped a hand to his ear, leaning toward Brad. "What was that, son?" he asked loudly, his voice quavering slightly. "Did you say something about the vintage? My hearing is not what it used to be. These airports are so loud." Brad smirked, winking at my father. "I said, we are getting the best for you. Pop, top, shelf only." "That is good," Grandpa Elijah said, settling back into his chair, a small smile playing on his lips that did not reach his eyes. "You are a good boy, Brad. Always looking out for the family quality." I gripped my fork until my knuckles turned white. Grandpa had heard every word, he was playing them, and they were too arrogant to see it. The trap was set, and Brad had just walked right into it, thinking he was the smartest man in the room. The appetizers arrived, delicate plates of beef carpaccio that I had prepared 1,000 times in the back, but never tasted. The familiar scent of truffle oil, usually a comfort, now made my stomach turn. I picked at the garnish, trying to make myself invisible, hoping the conversation would drift to sports or the weather. But Grandpa Elijah was not done. He pushed his plate away, half-eaten, and folded his heavy calloused hands on the table, fixing me with a look that was suddenly devoid of the grandfatherly warmth I had seen in the driveway. It was the look of a man who built a logistics empire from a single truck, the look of a man who knew exactly what things cost. "Let us talk business, baby girl," he said, his voice cutting through the ambient chatter of the restaurant with laser precision. "The food is pretty, but pretty does not pay the rent I want to know about." The numbers. What was your food cost percentage last month? And what is your net profit margin sitting at for the last quarter? The questions hit me like a physical blow. I froze my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. I knew how to cost out a nightly special. I knew how to minimize waste on a loin of beef. But I did not know the overall profit margins of Le Jardin. That information lived in the owner's office, a place I was not allowed to enter unless I was being reprimanded. I opened my mouth to speak to try and fake it, but my mind went completely blank. The index cards my father had forced me to memorize mentioned a profit margin, but in my panic the numbers swam together. Was it 10% at 15? Well, I stammered, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks again, shrinking under his intense stare. Food costs have been fluctuating because of the supply chain issues, and we are investing a lot in the new menu, so My father Desmond did not let me finish. He cut across me, his voice booming with a false conviviality that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Pop, do not bore her with the math." He laughed, waving his hand as if the question was ridiculous, and pouring more wine into Grandpa's glass. "Aaliyah is the artist, the creative genius behind the brand. I handle the boring stuff, the books and the banking. And let me tell you, she is a gold mine. We are clearing 20% net profit every single month. Easy. It is a money printing machine." Grandpa Elijah did not look at my father. He kept his eyes locked on mine for a long, terrible second, searching for the truth in my panic before slowly shifting his gaze to Desmond. 20%. He repeated, his voice flat and unreadable. 20% net in the restaurant industry. In this economy, with that wine list. My father nodded vigorously, sweating slightly at his temples despite the aggressive air conditioning. Absolutely best investment we ever made. The overhead is managed very strictly. We run a tight ship. Grandpa Elijah leaned back in his chair. He did not smile. He did not nod. Instead, he began to tap his index finger against the white linen tablecloth. A slow, rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. I remembered that sound from my childhood. It was the sound he made when he was negotiating a contract, when he was calculating risk, when he smelled a lie that insulted his intelligence. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. "Is that so?" he said softly. His eyes flicked to Bianca, who was busy taking a selfie with her lobster bisque, then to my mother, who was nervously adjusting her diamond necklace, and finally back to me, examining my terror with a clinical detachment. 20%. Well, that is remarkable, truly remarkable. I would love to see the books later, Desmond. Just to see how you are pulling off a miracle like that. My father paled, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Of course, Pop, any time. But let us just enjoy the meal tonight, right? No need to work on your first night back, Grandpa." Elijah stopped tapping. He picked up his wineglass, the cheap house red Brad had ordered, and swirled it, staring into the dark liquid. "Right," he murmured. "Let us enjoy the meal." But I saw the set of his jaw. He knew. 20% was a lie. Impossible and insulting. And he knew my father was the one telling it. That night, while I lay awake in my damp studio apartment, listening to the sirens wail down the block and trying to ignore the gnawing hunger in my stomach, my grandfather was not sleeping. He had returned to his suite at the Ritz-Carlton, but he did not get into the high-thread count sheets. Instead, he sat in the dim light of the sitting room, pouring himself a glass of water and waiting. At exactly midnight, there was a soft knock on the door. It was Ms. Sterling, his personal attorney for 30 years. She was a woman who could freeze water with a look, and she walked in carrying a thick leather briefcase that contained the destruction of my parents' facade. I did not know this was happening at the time. Of course, I only learned the details later, but I can picture it clearly. Ms. Sterling sat across from him and didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You were right, Elijah," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "It is worse than we thought." She opened the briefcase and slid a series of glossy photographs across the mahogany coffee table. The first set showed me Aaliyah leaving the restaurant in the rain, walking 5 miles on the highway, and entering the crumbling building in the south side that was now my home. There were pictures of the barred windows, the overflowing dumpsters, and me looking exhausted and broken, carrying my knife roll. Then she laid out the second set of photos. These were bright and colorful. They showed Bianca laughing as she climbed into a brand new white Porsche Cayenne. There were photos of her shopping at Gucci, carrying bags that cost more than my annual rent. There were shots of my parents dining at expensive steakhouses and driving their own luxury sedans. The contrast was sickening. One granddaughter living in squalor, the other living like a princess. But the photos were just the emotional hook. The real weapon was the stack of documents Ms. Sterling produced next. "Here is the money trail," she explained, pointing to the highlighted rows on the bank statements. "You have been depositing $5,000 a month into the trust account for 5 years. That is $300,000 principal, not including interest. Every single month on the 5th, the money hits the account, and every single month on the 6th, it is transferred out." She traced the line with her manicured finger. "It does not go to Aaliyah. It never has. It goes here to a holding company owned by Desmond King. And from there, it pays the lease on the luxury apartment Bianca lives in. It pays the car note on the Porsche. It pays for their country club dues. They have been using Aaliyah's support fund as their personal piggy bank for half a decade." Grandpa Elijah picked up the papers, his hands trembling, not with age, but with a cold, dark rage. He looked at the photo of me soaking wet on the side of the road, and then at the photo of Bianca's new car. His jaw tightened until a vein pulsed in his temple. He had worked his fingers to the bone driving trucks, so his family would never know poverty, and they had used his generosity to enslave his favorite grandchild. He stood up, walking to the window to look out at the city lights. "Vultures," he whispered, his voice rough with betrayal. "They are nothing but vultures picking the meat off her bones while she starves." He turned back to Ms. Sterling, his eyes hard as flint. "Get everything ready. We are not just cutting them off. We are going to bury them tomorrow. I will teach them a lesson they will never forget." The notification from Grandpa Elijah arrived at noon, like a royal decree, sending shockwaves through the family group. Chat aimed straight at my parents. Greed. It was short, simple, and terrifyingly expensive. Dinner Saturday night at the Obsidian. 8 o'clock sharp. I have a special announcement regarding the future of the family assets and a celebratory gift to bestow. Dress to impress. The Obsidian was not just a restaurant. It was a fortress of exclusivity where a single appetizer cost more than my weekly grocery budget. It was the kind of place where billionaires went to feel regular, and regular people went to go bankrupt. My phone immediately lit up with a separate thread from my mother, Latoya, excluding Grandpa. Her text was practically vibrating with excitement. "This is it," she wrote, followed by a string of money bag emojis. "He bought the act. He is going to release the rest of the trust fund early, or maybe he is handing over the entire logistics company to your father. Finally, we can stop pretending to be on a budget." I could practically hear the champagne corks popping in their house miles away. "My father." Desmond chimed in his message, dripping with arrogance. I knew the old man would come around. He just needed to see that we are managing the family image correctly. Make sure you all look the part. We need to show him we are ready for the next level of wealth. Bianca did not even type words, she just sent screenshots of a diamond tennis bracelet and a listing for a vacation home in the Hamptons. I am wearing the red Valentino, she added. Getting my hair done at 3. Do not be late. Aaliyah, and try not to look like you work for a living. I sat on a milk crate in the alley behind the restaurant staring at the screen, with a knot of dread tightening in my stomach, the obsidian. My grandfather was taking us to the pinnacle of luxury to give us a gift, and I had absolutely nothing to give him in return. I checked my bank balance on my banking app, $42.16. That was it. That was everything I had to my name, until payday next week. Panic clawed at my throat. How could I show up to a dinner like that empty-handed? My parents would undoubtedly have some ostentatious gift bought with the money they stole from me. Bianca would probably give him something flashy and expensive using his own credit card. But I wanted to give him something real. Something to show him how much I loved him and missed him, and I could not even afford a decent card. I felt a hot flush of shame burn my cheeks. I was 32 years old, and I could not even buy my grandfather a welcome home present. The lie I was living felt heavier than ever. I was supposed to be a successful restaurateur, a woman of means, and here I was counting pennies and praying my shoes would not fall apart before Saturday. The contrast between my family's jubilant greed and my own crushing poverty was so sharp it made me want to scream. They were planning how to spend millions they had not earned yet, while I was wondering if I could afford the bus fare to get to the dinner to hear about it. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the brick wall, letting the kitchen exhaust fan blow warm, stale air over me. They thought they had won. They thought the lie had worked and Grandpa was about to hand them the keys to the kingdom. I did not know what the announcement was, but the sinking feeling in my gut told me that whatever happened at the Obsidian on Saturday night was going to change everything. I just prayed I could survive it without being exposed as the fraud they had forced me to become. Saturday evening hung over the city like a wet wool blanket, heavy with humidity and impending rain. I stood in front of the cracked mirror in my basement studio, smoothing the fabric of my black slip dress. It was the only formal thing I owned, a relic from my college graduation that I had miraculously saved from the pawn shop. I had spent an hour steaming out the wrinkles with a boiling kettle because I did not own an iron, praying I could revive the faded fabric into something resembling elegance. It was clean, but it looked tired. Just like me. I walked the mile to my parents' house to save bus fare for the trip home, sweating in the sticky air, clutching my purse to hide the fraying strap. When I turned up the driveway, the contrast was a physical pain. The house was lit up like a palace. My father Desmond was wiping a speck of dust from the chrome on his Mercedes, while Bianca posed for photos by the front door in a red Valentino gown that cost more than my annual rent. She looked stunning and expensive, everything I was not. My mother Latoya stepped out onto the porch, adjusting a diamond earring. Her eyes landed on me, and the smile slid off her face like oil. She marched down the steps, her heels clicking on the stone pavement, stopping inches from me to inspect my outfit with a curl of her lip that made my stomach turn. "What in God's name are you wearing?" she hissed, looking around frantically as if the neighbors might witness my shame. "You intend to wear this rag to dinner with a billionaire. Do you have any idea how much tonight costs per plate? That dress looks like you pulled it out of a donation bin. It is an insult to the venue and to your grandfather. It is all I have." Mom, I said quietly, fighting the urge to cross my arms and hide my body. I tried to clean it up. I pressed it. "Nice. You look like the help," she spat, her voice dripping with venom, "and not even the front of house help. You look like the dishwasher, which I suppose is accurate." She turned back toward the shiny lineup of cars waving at my father. "We are leaving now." "Can I ride with you?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. It is starting to sprinkle, and I do not want to ruin my hair or get the dress wet. My mother laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed in the driveway. Absolutely not. We have an image to maintain. Aaliyah, Bianca is arriving in the Mercedes. Your father and I are taking the Lexus. We cannot have you climbing out of the back seat looking like a charity case. It would ruin the entrance. Take your own car and park it blocks away so no one connects that rust bucket to us. I do not have a car, I whispered, my face burning. You know that. Dad has the title to the Honda. He never gave it back. That sounds like a personal failure, she said, turning her back on me. Take an Uber. Take a taxi. Just do not let anyone see you arrive at the same time as Bianca. We need Pop to focus on her success, not your pathetic existence. Get out of my driveway before you depress the property value. They drove off, leaving me standing in the cloud of exhaust fumes, choking on the reality of my situation. I checked my bank app. I did not have enough for an Uber to the Obsidian. I had $2.50 on my transit card. I walked 3 blocks to the bus stop as the rain began to fall harder. I sat on the plastic bench surrounded by strangers, holding my purse over my head to protect my hair. Knowing I was about to walk into the most expensive restaurant in the city, smelling like diesel fumes and rain, while my family drank champagne and laughed at my expense. The Obsidian was not just a restaurant, it was a temple to excess, where the air smelled of aged leather and money that had never known a hard day's work. The hostess stand was made of black marble, and the velvet ropes were actual velvet, not the cheap synthetic stuff. The guests gliding through the lobby were draped in designer labels, their laughter sounding like wind chimes made of diamond. I stood in the entryway, water dripping from my hem onto the pristine terrazzo floor, clutching my purse like a shield against the stares of the elite. I had walked 4 blocks from the bus stop in the pouring rain. My carefully steamed dress was clinging to my legs, and my hair, once smooth, was now frizzing in the humidity. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who did not belong. My family was already seated at a prominent table near the center of the room, illuminated by the soft glow of a crystal chandelier. They looked like a magazine spread, a perfect picture of wealth and success. Bianca was laughing, her head thrown back, displaying the long line of her neck, while my mother Latoya sipped champagne with a smug satisfaction that radiated across the room. As I approached the table, trying to move quietly, despite the squelch of my wet shoes, Brad spotted me first. He nudged Bianca and pointed, his face lighting up with malicious glee. The entire table turned to look, and the conversation died instantly. My father Desmond frowned, his eyes scanning the room to see who else had noticed the wet dog approaching his table. Well, look what the storm dragged in, Brad announced, his voice carrying over the low hum of the restaurant. Look, everyone, the sewer rat has finally emerged from the drain. Did you swim here, Aaliyah? Or did the bus splash you on the way to the peasant stop? I froze, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks, burning through the chill of the rain. I am sorry, I whispered. I had to take the bus. Brad laughed, a harsh sound that made several nearby diners turn their heads. Bus. I did not know. They let people like you on the bus anymore. I thought you had to walk everywhere to save the environment, or maybe just to save $1. He gestured to a small, wobbly table near the kitchen doors, far away from the main group. Why do not you sit over there at the kids' table, Aaliyah? This table is for the adults. We are discussing serious business tonight, real money, investments, and futures. You would not understand any of it anyway. Stick to your coloring books or whatever it is you do. My mother tittered, hiding her smile behind her napkin. Oh, Brad! Stop teasing her. She is trying her best. Look, she even wore her nice dress. It is almost dry in places. The cruelty was so casual, so accepted. It was a sport to them, and I was the ball. They kicked around for amusement. I looked at the small, isolated table near the kitchen. The same kitchen where I knew people were working just as hard as I did, for a fraction of what these people spent on wine. and I felt a spark of something hot and dangerous in my chest. It wasn't shame anymore. It was rage, pure and unadulterated. They wanted me to be small, to be grateful for the scraps they threw at me. But tonight I was done eating scraps. The party moved into the private dining room, a transition that felt less like a celebration and more like a coronation. Everyone settled into their assigned seats with the practiced ease of people who believed the world revolved around them. My parents. Desmond and Latoya sat flanking Grandpa Elijah, their faces masks of eager anticipation, while Bianca and Brad took the spots directly across from him, ready to receive their due. I was relegated to the far end of the table near the service door, a physical reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted duck. Grandpa Elijah sat at the head of the table, silent and watchful. He looked different tonight. Gone was the jovial grandfather who had hugged me in the driveway. In his place was the man who had built an empire from scratch. His eyes, hard and unreadable, scanned the table, resting briefly on each person before moving on. He didn't touch his appetizer, didn't participate in the small talk that buzzed around him. He just watched, waiting. When the main course was cleared, Grandpa Elijah raised a hand signaling the sommelier. The room fell silent instantly, every eye fixed on him, expecting a toast, or perhaps the announcement they had all been waiting for. Instead, he pointed to a bottle on the reserve list, a vintage that made even the sommelier raise an eyebrow. "Bring me the 1982 Chateau Petrus," he ordered, his voice low and commanding. "The $5,000 bottle." A collective gasp went around the table. My mother clutched her pearls, her eyes widening in delight. $5,000, she whispered. "That is extravagant, even for us." "Pop, pop. Nothing is too good for family," Grandpa Elijah replied, his gaze never leaving my parents' faces. He waited while the wine was poured, the deep ruby liquid swirling in the crystal glasses. The sommelier retreated, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Grandpa Elijah stood up, holding his glass aloft. The light caught the wine, turning it the color of blood. "I want to propose a toast," he said, his voice steady and resonant. "This bottle cost $5,000. It is a significant sum, a sum that could change a life, pay rent, buy groceries, or start a dream." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. He looked directly at my father, then at my mother, and finally at Bianca. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. "This bottle is worth exactly the same amount I have been sending every single month for the past 5 years, to a very special person at this table, to someone I believed was building a future, to someone I trusted." He raised the glass higher. "To the truth. May it taste as rich as this wine." My parents beamed, their smiles stretching wide and predatory. They clinked glasses with Bianca and Brad, convinced the toast was for them, for their stewardship of the family wealth, for the inheritance they believed was about to be handed over. Bianca actually winked at me, a cruel little gesture that said, "I won." I sat frozen, my hands clenched in my lap, staring at my empty plate. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. The $5,000, the monthly payments. It was all real, and they thought it was for them. They thought my grandfather was celebrating their theft, while I sat there drowning in the shame of a life I hadn't built, unaware that the storm was about to break right over their heads. The rich taste of the vintage wine lingered on my tongue, bitter as bile, while my parents preened under the glow of what they thought was my grandfather's approval. They drank deeply, celebrating a victory they had stolen, while I sat there picking at the linen napkin in my lap, trying to make myself disappear. The air in the private dining room felt stifling, thick with the scent of roasted meat and expensive lies. I kept my eyes on the tablecloth, afraid that if I looked up I would scream, "Grandpa!" Elijah set his glass down with a deliberate clink that cut through the self. Congratulatory chatter. He turned his body slightly, shifting his focus away from my father and toward my sister Bianca. She was busy admiring her reflection in the back of a spoon, adjusting a stray curl of her expensive weave. She looked perfect, polished, and entirely artificial. That is a mighty fine car you pulled up in. Bianca? Grandpa? Elijah said, his voice conversational but carrying an undercurrent of steel. I saw the valet park it, a white Porsche Cayenne brand new model, if I am not mistaken. That must have set you back 100 grand. Easy. Bianca beamed, preening under the attention. Oh yes, Pop, isn't she gorgeous? She flipped her hair over her shoulder, a gesture practiced for her followers. It is fully loaded. Custom leather interior, upgraded sound system. We needed something safe and stylish for the baby, you know? Grandpa nodded slowly, his eyes crinkling at the corners, though the smile did not reach them. It certainly is stylish. But tell me, granddaughter, how does a young woman afford a vehicle like that? I know the economy is tough for young folks these days. Bianca laughed, a light, dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. Oh, Pop, you know how it is. I am an influencer now. Brand deals are very lucrative. I have over 50,000 followers. She gestured vaguely with her manicured hand. Plus, Brad has been killing it in the market. His investments are paying off huge dividends. We are doing very well for ourselves, self-made. You know? Brad puffed out his chest, swirling his wine. Smart money moves, Elijah. You have to spend money to make money. That is what I always say. We are building an empire just like you did. Is that so? Grandpa? Elijah said, his voice dropping an octave. Interesting. Very interesting. He held Brad's gaze for a second too long until Brad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then slowly, deliberately, Grandpa turned his head. The movement was predatory, like a lion spotting a limping gazelle. His eyes locked onto me, and the warmth I had seen earlier was gone, replaced by a confusing mix of anger and sorrow. And you, Aaliyah? He asked, his voice cutting through the room like a whip crack. I look at your sister, and I see wealth. I see success. I see a Porsche and diamonds. But then I look at you. He pointed a shaking finger at me, at my faded dress, at the cheap purse I had tucked under my chair. And I see poverty. I saw your shoes in the driveway, Aaliyah. They are worn through to the sole. You are walking on cardboard. The table went deathly silent. My mother stopped mid-sip, her glass hovering near her lips. Grandpa leaned forward, his eyes burning into mine. 5 years. Aaliyah, 5 years I have been sending that money, $5,000 every single month like clockwork. That is $300,000. $300,000 to help you build your dream, to keep you safe, to make sure you never had to struggle. And yet you sit here looking like you haven't eaten a decent meal in weeks. He slammed his hand onto the table, making the silverware jump. Where is it, Aaliyah? Where is the money I sent you? Why are you living in squalor when I paid for a palace? My father, Desmond, moved faster than I had ever seen him move in my life. He practically threw himself across the table, knocking over a crystal water glass in his haste to cut off my reply before I could speak. The water soaked into the white tablecloth, spreading like a dark stain. But he ignored it, his eyes wide with a frantic, desperate energy that made him look like a cornered animal. Dad, please, he stammered, holding up his hands as if to physically push Grandpa's anger back down. Do not upset yourself. We did not want to burden you with the ugly details on your first night back. We were trying to protect you from the disappointment. He took a deep breath, composing his features into a mask of tragic, paternal sorrow. We gave Aaliyah the money. Pop, every cent, just like you asked. But you know how young people are these days. She did not want to build a slow, steady business like we did. She wanted a shortcut. She wanted to get rich quick. He shook his head sadly, casting a pitying look in my direction. She got caught up in that cryptocurrency madness. Bitcoin NFTs, digital tokens. I do not even understand half of it. She invested everything you sent her, gambling on the internet instead of building a future. And when the market crashed, she lost it all. Every single dime gone overnight. That is why she is living like this. We tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen. My mother. Latoya jumped in right on cue, her voice trembling with fake emotion. It is true. Pop, pop, she cried, dabbing at dry eyes with her napkin. We are so ashamed. That is why she is in debt up to her eyeballs. That is why she drives that terrible car. She has been borrowing money from us just to keep the lights on. She is financially illiterate, father. We tried to help her manage it, but she is just so wasteful, always buying things she does not need, living beyond her means. It breaks my heart to say it, but she squandered your gift. The table was silent except for the soft clinking of silverware from other diners, oblivious to the assassination of my character happening right there. I sat frozen, my mind reeling as their lies washed over me. It was masterful, really. They took my poverty, the poverty they had forced upon me, and used it as proof of my irresponsibility. They turned their theft into my failure. But this time, the shock didn't silence me. It woke me up. I looked at my father sweating in his expensive suit, lying to his own father without blinking. I looked at my mother, dripping in diamonds, bought with money that was meant to change my life. And something inside me snapped. The fear of their disapproval vanished, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I stood up my chair, scraping loudly against the floor. The sound cut through their performance like a knife. What money? I asked, my voice shaking not with fear, but with fury. My father's head whipped around, his eyes bulging with a warning glare. Sit down, Aaliyah, he hissed. Do not make this worse than it already is. No, I said louder this time. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides. I want to know what you are talking about, Dad. You said I lost the money. What money? I looked directly at Grandpa Elijah, ignoring my parents, frantic signaling Grandpa. I have never received a check from you. I have never received a wire transfer. I have never received a single envelope of cash. In the last 5 years, I have not received one red cent from anyone in this family. In fact, I have been paying them rent to live in an apartment they owned outright. My mother gasped, clutching her chest. You liar, she shrieked. How dare you lie to your grandfather after he was so generous to you? You are trying to cover up your mistakes. I am not lying, I shouted, slamming my hand down on the table, causing the wine glasses to jump. I do not know anything about crypto. I do not have an investment account. I have a savings account with $42 in it. I worked double shifts to pay you. Rent, Mom. I ate leftovers from the restaurant because I could not afford groceries. I never got any money from you, Grandpa. Never, not once. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, thick with the weight of the truth hanging between us, Grandpa. Elijah looked from my flushed, angry face to my parents, pale, sweating ones. He did not look confused anymore. He looked lethal. Grandpa Elijah's fist came down on the table like a gavel, made of bone and fury. The crystal wine glasses jumped and a fork clattered to the floor with a metallic ring that echoed in the sudden silence. The chatter in the restaurant died instantly, replaced by the collective intake of breath from 50 wealthy strangers. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop as if a storm had just broken through the ceiling. What the hell? He roared, his voice booming with the raw power of a man who had stared down union bosses and hostile takeovers. He pushed himself up from his chair, looming over the table like an Old Testament prophet, his face flushed dark with rage. I have sent you $5,000 every damn month for 5 years. Do you hear me? Every single month, like clockwork. He pointed a shaking finger at my father, then at my mother, his eyes blazing with a fire that could melt steel. I set up that trust the day I retired. I put it in your name, Desmond, because I trusted you to do right by your daughter. I trusted you to be a father. I sent that money specifically for Aaliyah to cover her rent in a safe building and to provide seed capital for her own restaurant. He turned to me, his expression softening for a fraction of a second, before hardening again into righteous indignation against them. $300,000, Aaliyah. That is the principal alone. With interest and the market performance of the trust, that account should be sitting at nearly 400 grand right now. That was your safety net, your future, your freedom, and you are telling me you never saw a dime of it. The numbers hung in the air, staggering and undeniable. $300,000. My knees went weak and I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. That kind of money changed lives. It bought houses. It started businesses. It meant security. And it had been mine all along, or it should have been. Brad choked on his wine, coughing violently as the liquid went down the wrong pipe, spraying fine red droplets onto the white tablecloth. He looked from Grandpa to Bianca, his eyes wide with a dawning horror that had nothing to do with concern for me and everything to do with self-preservation. Bianca's hand flew to her mouth and her fork slipped from her fingers, hitting her plate with a sharp clatter. She looked like a child caught stealing candy, but on a scale that could send her to prison. My parents were trembling. My father, Desmond, usually so composed and arrogant, was shaking so hard, his water glass rattled against its coaster. My mother, Latoya, had gone gray beneath her makeup, her mouth opening and closing without sound like a fish on a hook. They were trapped, exposed in the one place they valued above all else, the public eye of their peers. The veneer of the perfect, successful family had been shattered, and underneath was nothing but rot and theft. The entire restaurant was watching them now, judging them, seeing them for the thieves they were, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt the immense weight of the truth finally being spoken aloud. The heavy double doors of the private dining room swung open, cutting through the thick tension like a knife. A woman strode in who looked less like a lawyer and more like an executioner in a tailored suit. It was Ms. Sterling, my grandfather's attorney, whom I had only heard whispers about, but never met. She carried a sleek silver briefcase and walked with a terrifying precision, ignoring the gasps of my parents as she approached the head of the table. She did not say a word of greeting. She simply cleared away a basket of untouched, artisan bread and set down a compact high-definition projector on the white tablecloth. With a soft hum, the device powered up. A beam of blue light sliced through the dim romantic lighting of the restaurant, hitting the pale silk wallpaper directly behind my father's head. The projection was massive, crisp, and undeniable. It was a digital bank statement blown up to the size of a movie poster. Ms. Sterling adjusted her glasses and tapped her tablet. Her voice was calm, cool, and devastatingly loud in the silent room. Ladies and gentlemen, let us look at the ledger. This is the transaction history for the custodial account managed by Desmond King on behalf of the beneficiary, Aaliyah King. She swiped the screen and the document scrolled, zooming in on a highlighted row of text. Here we have the activity for January 5th. Incoming wire transfer from Elijah King. Amount $5,000. Memo line reads, Aaliyah's Rent and Business Fund. She paused, letting everyone absorb the number. The money was real. It had been there every single month. Then she swiped again, moving to the very next line item, and here is the activity for January 6th, exactly 24 hours later. Outgoing wire transfer. Amount $2,500. Recipient Bianca. King personal checking. Memo line reads, Neiman Marcus. Bill payment. My mother let out a strangled sob, but Ms. Sterling was relentless. She swiped again, revealing the next line. Also on January 6th, outgoing wire transfer, amount $2,500. Recipient Bradley Miller, investment account. Memo line reads, Crypto Trading Fund. She began to scroll faster, and the pattern repeated over and over again hypnotically. Month after month, year after year. February 5th, money in. February 6th, money out, to Bianca and Brad. March 5th, money in. March 6th, money out. It was not an occasional dip into the funds. It was a systematic looting. The screen flashed with entry after entry documenting 5 years of theft. The money meant to keep a roof over my head and food in my stomach had been siphoned off within 24 hours of its arrival, used to fund my sister's designer wardrobe and her husband's high-risk gambling habits. The evidence was 5 feet tall, glowing on the wall, and there was absolutely nowhere for them to hide from it. Ms. Sterling swiped to the next document. A property deed that filled the projection with stark black text. This is the purchase agreement for Unit 4B at the Lakeview Towers. The apartment you lived in until yesterday. Aaliyah. It was purchased 5 years ago with a single lump sum payment from Elijah King. The deed was originally filed in the name of Aaliyah King. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. The apartment was mine. It had been mine the whole time. My name was right there in black and white listed as the sole owner. But then Miss Sterling tapped the screen again, and a second document appeared overlaid on the first. It was a transfer of deed, dated 3 years ago, showing my signature signing the property over to Desmond and LaToya King for the sum of $1. The signature looked like mine. It had the same loop on the A, the same sharp finish on the K, but I had never seen that document in my life. I had never signed away my home for $1. This transfer, Ms. Sterling said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel, is a forgery. The notary who stamped this is a personal friend of your father currently under investigation for similar fraud. Desmond King forged his daughter's signature to steal a $500,000 asset from her while she was working double shifts to pay him rent for it. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had not just been paying rent to my parents, I had been paying rent to live in my own house, rent that was higher than the market rate, rent that kept me poor while they lived in luxury. My knees buckled and I had to grab the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. So I was paying you. I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage so deep it felt cold. I was paying you $2,000 a month to live in a house that Grandpa bought for me, and you used that money to what? Buy Bianca new shoes, take vacations. My mother, LaToya, looked away, unable to meet my eyes, but my father, Desmond, stared straight ahead, his jaw set in a stubborn line, denying everything, even as the proof glowed on the wall behind him. We were managing your assets, he said, his voice tight. We were protecting the property. You were young, irresponsible. We knew you would lose it somehow, so we took steps to secure the family investment. Secure it, I screamed, losing control for the first time. You stole it. You stole my home. You stole my money. You stole 5 years of my life while I starved myself to pay you. You watched me struggle. You watched me walk to work in the rain because I could not afford a car. And all that time you were sitting on my money, spending it on her. I pointed at Bianca, who was shrinking into her chair, her face pale and terrified. You funded her entire life with my money. You bought her that car with my money. You paid for her wedding with my money. Every nice thing she owns belongs to me. Ms. Sterling nodded, confirming my accusation. Precisely, the forensic accounting shows a direct line from your rent payments to Bianca's credit card bills. You have been subsidizing your sister's lifestyle for 5 years. Aaliyah, you have not been the family failure. You have been the family financier, and they evicted you the moment they thought they could squeeze a little more value out of the property by giving it to her directly. My mother, LaToya, did the only thing she knew how to do when cornered by the undeniable truth. She weaponized her tears. She threw herself toward Grandpa Elijah, clutching the edge of the table, her knuckles white as she let out a wail that sounded less like grief and more like a siren signaling the end of her world. Her mascara ran down her face in black rivers, ruining the expensive makeup she had applied just hours ago to impress him. "Daddy, please. You have to understand," she sobbed. her voice pitching up into a hysterical register. We were not stealing. We were protecting the family assets. We were just holding it for her. We were acting as stewards. She turned to point a trembling finger at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, frantic malice. Aaliyah is not like us, Daddy. She is slow. She has always been simple-minded about money. She is a cook for heaven's sake. She works with her hands because she does not have the head for business. If we had given her that money, she would have wasted it all. She would have been scammed or lost it on some foolish restaurant dream that would have failed in 6 months. We had to intervene. We had to save her from herself. I stood there feeling the insult land like a slap. She was calling me stupid to justify robbing me. She was painting me as incompetent to explain why she had stripped me of my dignity. Bianca, on the other hand, my mother continued breathless with the effort of spinning her lie. Bianca is sharp. She is wise. She understands how the world works. We invested the money in her brand because she knows how to make it grow. We were building wealth for the whole family. Daddy, we were leveraging the capital to create a return on investment through Bianca's influence. It was a strategic decision, not theft. We did it for everyone. The room was silent except for her jagged breathing. Grandpa Elijah looked down at his daughter with an expression of profound disgust. He did not look angry anymore. He looked tired. He looked like a man realizing that the tree he had planted had produced rotten fruit. Invested. He repeated the word, rolling off his tongue like a curse. He picked up the stack of photos Miss Sterling had provided earlier, shuffling through them until he found the ones he wanted. He tossed them onto the table in front of my mother one by one. "Is this an investment, LaToya?" He pointed to a picture of a handbag. "A $30,000 Hermes Birkin bag. Does this pay dividends? Or this, a Porsche Cayenne that loses value the second you drive it off the lot. Is that your idea of a return on investment?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You tell me that Bianca is wise, that she is a business genius. So show me the profits. Show me the ledger. Where is the interest? Where is the capital growth? Because from where I am sitting, all I see is depreciating assets and vanity. You did not invest in a business. You burned my money on toys for your favorite child, and you called it strategy. And you dared to call Aaliyah stupid while she was the only one actually working for a living." My mother shrank back, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. There were no profits. There was no strategy. There was only greed, and she knew that he saw right through her. The silence in the room was shattered by the sound of a chair scraping violently against the marble floor. Brad stood up so abruptly that his chair toppled over backward, hitting the ground with a deafening crash. His face had drained of all color, leaving him looking like a wax figure, melting under the heat of the interrogation. He was not looking at Grandpa Elijah or Ms. Sterling. He was staring at Bianca, his wife of 2 years, the mother of his unborn child, with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror mixed with a frantic calculation of his own survival. Brad worked in high finance. He dealt with compliance officers and federal regulations every day. He knew exactly what the words wire fraud and embezzlement meant for a man with a Series 7 license and a reputation to uphold. He looked at the projection on the wall, the damning evidence of stolen funds, and then he looked down at Bianca, who was still trembling in her seat. "You told me it was a trust fund," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "You told me you were a self-made millionaire. You told me your parents were investing in your lifestyle brand because it was profitable. You lied to me." Bianca reached out for his hand, her fingers grasping at the sleeve of his jacket. "Brad, baby, please calm down. We can explain. Don't you touch me." He recoiled, slapping her hand away as if she were contagious. He backed away from the table, his eyes wild. "I am a licensed financial advisor, Bianca. Do you have any idea what the SEC does to people who are beneficiaries of laundered money? I manage millions of dollars in client assets. If my name is attached to a federal fraud investigation, my career is over. My license is gone. I could go to jail for spending money you stole. He pointed a shaking finger at her, his face twisting into a sneer of absolute disgust. I married a success story. I married a woman who told me she was building an empire. But you are nothing. You are just a petty thief stealing from your own sister's piggy bank. You are a fraud. Bianca, a common criminal. The insults hit their mark. Bianca stopped crying and her face hardened. The mask of the victim slipped away, revealing the spoiled, cornered brat underneath. She stood up, matching his aggression, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "Oh, do not you dare play the saint now, Brad," she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing the tense atmosphere of the restaurant. "You did not seem to have a problem with the money when we were spending it. Did you ask where the cash came from when we bought your Rolex? The $18,000 watch you are wearing right now?" She pointed at his wrist where the gold watch glinted under the chandelier. "You knew I did not make that kind of money selling lip gloss on Instagram. You never asked questions because you liked the lifestyle too much. You liked the first-class flights to Dubai. You liked the bottle service at the clubs. You are just as guilty as I am. So do not stand there and pretend you are some innocent victim. You spent her money just as fast as I did." Brad looked down at his watch, then back at Ms. Sterling, who was typing something on her tablet. He looked like a trapped animal realizing the cage. "Door had just locked. I did not know," he stammered, addressing the lawyer. "And Grandpa Elijah. I swear I did not know it was stolen. I will testify. I will give it all back. I am filing for divorce, you coward," Bianca shrieked, lunging at him, only to be held back by my father, who had finally roused himself from his stupor. "You are going to leave me now, when I am pregnant, because the money ran out. I am leaving you because you are a liability," Brad spat, straightening his jacket and backing toward the door. "I am not going to prison for you. You are on your own." He turned and practically ran out of the private dining room, leaving his pregnant wife screaming insults at his retreating back. The perfect power couple had disintegrated in less than 3 minutes, destroyed by the weight of their own greed and the sudden, terrifying reality of consequences. The heavy wooden door swung shut behind Brad, leaving a silence in the room that was so profound it felt like the air had been sucked out. My sister Bianca collapsed into her chair, sobbing into her hands, but the sound did not move me. It used to be that her tears were the only thing that could make me bend, that could make me sacrifice my own comfort to fix her problems. But watching her cry now, all I saw was a child throwing a tantrum because her favorite toy had been taken away. The spell was broken. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped loud and harsh against the marble floor, echoing like a gavel strike in a courtroom. I stood up slowly, feeling my legs steady beneath me. For the first time all night, I reached up and wiped the wetness from my cheeks. These were not tears of sadness anymore. They were the last remnants of the girl who used to beg for their approval. The girl who thought she was worthless. That girl was gone, burned away by the fire of the truth. "Look at me," I said. My voice was low, but it carried a weight that made my parents flinch. I said, "Look at me." Slowly. My mother Latoya raised her head. Her mascara was running her face a mask of ruined vanity. My father, Desmond, looked up, his eyes hollow and shifting, unable to hold my gaze. I stared at them, looking deep into the faces of the people who had given me life, and then systematically tried to destroy it. I looked for love. I looked for regret. I looked for anything that resembled a parent. But all I saw were strangers, thieves, parasites. "For 32 years, you made me believe I was broken." I said the words, tumbling out with a cold clarity. "You told me I was the mistake, the disappointment, the burden you had to carry out of charity. You watched me scrub floors and burn my hands, working double shifts just to survive. You watched me walk in the rain because I could not afford a bus pass, and you told me it was what I deserved because I was not smart enough or driven enough to do better. I took a step closer to the table, and my father actually shrank back into his seat. I believed you. I hated myself because I could not be the daughter you wanted. I spent every night wondering what was wrong with me, why I was such a failure compared to Bianca. But I wasn't a failure, was I? I wasn't a burden. I was your payroll. I was the golden goose you kept in a cage and plucked feather by feather until I was bleeding. My mother made a small whimpering sound, but I did not stop. I was relentless. You ate five-star meals while I ate instant noodles. You drove luxury cars while I walked on the highway, and you slept soundly in a penthouse. I paid for while I shivered in a basement with rats. You aren't parents, you are predators. You fed on your own child. I took a deep breath, feeling the final thread of attachment snap. It was a physical sensation, a sharp pain followed by an immense lightness. From this moment on, I am no longer your daughter. I do not have a father. I do not have a mother, and I certainly do not have a sister. You are nothing to me but debtors, and I am coming to collect. I turned away from them, breaking the eye contact that they were too cowardly to maintain. I looked at Miss Sterling, who was watching me with a fierce, unyielding approval, standing like a soldier, ready for command. Ms. Sterling, I said, my voice ringing with finality. Do it. Please proceed with the next step. I want justice, and I want it now. Ms. Sterling did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply closed the leather folder on the table with a soft thud that sounded like a coffin closing. Then she turned her head slightly toward the main entrance of the private dining room and gave a single sharp nod. It was a signal executed with military precision, and the response was immediate. The heavy double doors swung open again, but this time it was not a sommelier with vintage wine or a waiter with a silver tray. Two men walked in wearing dark suits that were clearly not tailored for fashion, but for authority. They moved with the heavy, purposeful stride of law enforcement officers who had no interest in the menu. They were detectives from the Economic Crimes Unit, and they had been waiting in the lobby for exactly this moment. The air in the room seemed to freeze. My father. Desmond stood up, his chair knocking over backward, his face turning a shade of purple I had never seen before. Who are you? He demanded, trying to summon the authority he used on his employees. This is a private party. You have no right to barge in here. The lead detective ignored him, pulling a badge from his jacket pocket. Desmond King, Latoya King, he asked, though it was clearly not a question. We have a warrant for your arrest. My mother let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. Arrest for what? We are upstanding citizens. We are members of the church. You are under arrest for 18 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of second-degree forgery, and massive tax evasion regarding the misappropriation of a custodial trust fund. The detective recited, his voice flat and bored as he reached for the handcuffs at his belt. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The reality of it hit them like a physical blow. My father tried to pull away as the detective grabbed his wrist. Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? I am a pillar of this community. I will sue you. I will have your badge for this. You can tell that to the judge. Mr. King, turn around and place your hands behind your back. The metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting tight was the loudest sound in the world. It cut through my father's bluster, silencing him instantly. My mother was next. She began to hyperventilate, clutching at her pearls as if they could protect her form. The law. Please, no. I cannot go to jail. I have a reputation. I cannot be seen like this. The second detective was not moved. He spun her around efficiently, securing her wrists behind her back. The sight of my parents, usually so composed and untouchable, now bound like common criminals, was jarring. It was the dismantling of a lifetime of arrogance in 30 seconds. They were marched toward the door, past the open mouths of the other diners, past the staff who watched with wide eyes, past the wreckage of the expensive dinner they had tried to enjoy on my dime. Bianca suddenly seemed to realize what was happening. Her safety net, her bank account, her protectors were being dragged away. Mom! Daddy! Wait! she shrieked, scrambling up from her chair and running after them, her heels slipping on the marble floor. You cannot take them. Who is going to pay for the baby? Who is going to pay for my house? Stop it! Stop it right now! She chased them into the hallway, her voice dissolving into hysterical sobs, a child watching her world end. I did not follow. I did not look away. I stood perfectly still at the table, my hand finding Grandpa Elijah's. His grip was warm and solid, an anchor in the storm. He squeezed my fingers tight, not looking at his son or daughter-in-law, but looking at me with a fierce, protective pride. The doors swung shut, cutting off Bianca's wails, leaving us in the sudden, heavy silence of the aftermath. It was over, the monster had been slain, and for the first time in my life, the room was quiet enough for me to breathe. The holding area of the central precinct smelled of stale coffee and despair, a sharp contrast to the truffle oil and vintage wine we had just left behind. My parents sat on metal benches in a small interview room, separated from us by a thick pane of scratched glass. They looked stripped of their power. My father, Desmond, had lost his tie and his shirt was rumpled. My mother, Latoya, was hugging herself, rocking back and forth, her eyes swollen and red. When they saw Grandpa Elijah walk in, leaning heavily on his cane, they rushed to the glass, their faces twisted with a desperate hope. Dad, thank God you are here, my father cried out, his voice muffled by the partition. You have to post bail. They set it at $500,000. It is ridiculous. You need to write the check so we can go home and sort this mess out with the lawyers. It is all just a terrible misunderstanding. Grandpa Elijah stood there, his face like a stone carving. He did not reach for his checkbook. He did not reach for his phone. He just looked at them with a profound, weary sadness. There will be no check, Desmond, he said, his voice low but carrying clearly through the vents. I am not posting bail. I am not hiring you a defense team. You are going to sit in that cell, and you are going to think about what you did. My mother's jaw dropped. What? But Daddy, you cannot leave us here. It is cold. The people in here are dangerous. We are your family. You ceased to be my family. The moment you stole from my granddaughter, Grandpa replied, turning his back on them. He nodded to Ms. Sterling, who stepped forward, opening a fresh file folder on the metal table. Ms. Sterling adjusted her glasses, looking at my parents with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. Let me explain the gravity of your situation. Mr. and Mrs. King, she began, her voice cutting through their protests. This is not a simple case of petty theft, because the money was transferred across state lines from Florida to Illinois. This is classified as wire fraud. That is a federal offense. She tapped the document in front of her regarding the apartment forgery. Because you forged a signature on a property deed to transfer ownership to yourselves, you have also committed second-degree forgery and real estate fraud. The district attorney is looking at the paper trail and he is very ambitious. Given the duration of the crime spanning 5 years and the amount stolen totaling over $300,000, plus the value of the real estate, the sentencing guidelines are severe. My father went pale, gripping the ledge of the window. How severe, he whispered. Ms. Sterling did not blink. You are looking at a minimum of 5 years in federal prison, likely closer to 10 given the breach of trust involving a dependent family member. And that is, if you take a plea deal. If you fight this and lose, you could be looking at 15 years. My mother let out a strangled scream, sliding down the wall to the floor. But what about our house? What about our accounts? We need money to fight this. That is the other part of the news, Ms. Sterling continued relentlessly. As of 10 minutes ago, the court has granted a temporary restraining order on all your assets. Your bank accounts have been frozen, your investment portfolios are locked, even the deed to your house is under a lien pending the investigation. The state is seizing everything to ensure restitution is paid to the victim. She gestured toward me, standing silently in the corner. You have no money, you have no home, and you have no resources. Everything you thought you owned is gone. You will be assigned a public defender because you cannot afford private counsel. My father looked at me, his eyes wide with horror, realizing the tables had turned completely. He was now the one who was poor. He was the one who was powerless. He slumped against the glass, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor next to my mother, two broken people trapped in a cage of their own making. Watching as I walked out of the station, a free woman leaving them to rot in the ruin they had built. The penthouse that Bianca had flaunted on her Instagram story just that morning now felt like a tomb. The floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city. Rain, but inside the air was freezing. Brad was standing by the kitchen island, dumping the contents of her jewelry box into a plastic bag. He did not look up when she burst in, mascara running down her cheeks, shaking from the scene at the restaurant. She expected him to hold her to tell her they would fight the charges together, but he just kept working, his movements jerky and angry. "Brad, stop it!" she screamed, grabbing his arm. "What are you doing? We need to call a lawyer. We need to figure out how to get Mom and Dad out on bail." Brad spun around and shoved a stack of papers into her chest. They hit her with a dull thud, sliding to the floor. It was a petition for divorce already signed and dated. His name was AIM, scrawled across the bottom in black ink, aggressive and final. "I am not calling anyone except my own attorney," he spat, his face twisted in disgust. "You are done. Bianca, we are done. I filed for an emergency annulment an hour ago. My lawyers are already arguing fraud. You lied about your financial status. You lied about the source of your income. I am cutting you loose before the SEC comes knocking on my door asking why I spent stolen money." Bianca stared at the papers, unable to comprehend the speed of his betrayal. "But I am your wife," she whispered. "I am carrying your child. You cannot just throw me away because my parents got in trouble." "Watch me," Brad sneered, walking past her to the door. He opened it and signaled to the building security guard, who was waiting in the hallway, painfully awkward. "I am not going down with your sinking ship, Bianca. The news is already out. TMZ just ran the story. Influencer family arrested for federal fraud. You are radioactive. My firm has already called me 3 times, demanding an explanation. I need to distance myself from you immediately to save my license." He pointed to the door. "Get out!" Bianca recoiled. "Get out. Where am I supposed to go? This is my house." "It is my house," Brad corrected coldly. "The lease is in my name. The furniture is in my name. The only thing you brought to this marriage was debt and lies. Security escort, Ms. King off the premises. She is no longer a resident here." As the guard stepped forward, looking apologetic but firm, Bianca's phone began to vibrate incessantly in her hand. She looked down, expecting messages of support from her fans. Instead, her screen was filled with notifications from her agency and sponsors. An email from her biggest fashion partner popped up at the top, subject line contract termination, effective immediately. She opened it, her hands trembling violently. "Due to the recent criminal allegations involving your family and the violation of our morals clause, we are severing all ties with the Bianca King brand. We demand the immediate return of all promotional products and the removal of our tag from your social media feed." Another notification followed from the credit card company. "Alert card, ending in 4500, has been frozen due to suspicious activity and federal seizure order." She looked up at Brad, panic closing her throat. "Brad, my cards are not working. I have no cash. The Porsche is in the garage. Let me just take the car." "The Porsche is a company car, leased under my investment firm," Brad said, stepping back and closing the distance between them emotionally and physically. "You do not have a car, you do not have a credit card, and you do not have a husband anymore. You have exactly what you earned, Bianca. Nothing. Now get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." The security guard took her arm gently but firmly, leading her out into the hallway. The heavy door of the penthouse slammed shut, and she heard the distinct click of the deadbolt sliding home. Bianca stood in the hallway, holding nothing but her phone, which was now flooding with hate comments from the thousands of followers who used to worship her. She had no home, no money, and nowhere to go. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped in, pressing the button for the lobby, descending from the high life straight to the bottom, where she finally understood what it meant to be truly alone. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent and smooth, a stark contrast to the rattling bus rides and broken-down trains I had taken for the last decade. I stood alone in the mirrored cabin, holding a single piece of paper in my hand. It was the court order issued just an hour ago, signed by the emergency judge, returning full legal possession of Unit 4B to me. Aaliyah King. I ran my thumb over the embossed seal, feeling the texture of justice. It was not just a piece of paper. It was the reclamation of 5 years of stolen life. When the elevator doors slid open directly into the foyer of the penthouse, I did not need a key. The code had already been reset by the building manager, who had been all too eager to help the true owner. Once the police report was filed, I stepped inside expecting silence, but instead I heard the frantic sounds of destruction and panic coming from the living room. I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking sharply on the imported hardwood floors. In the center of the sunken living room, Bianca was on her knees, surrounded by a mountain of luxury leather goods. She had emptied the closet and was feverishly stuffing Hermes Birkin Chanel clutches and Louis Vuitton totes into large black garbage bags. She looked like a madwoman. Her hair disheveled, her designer dress torn at the hem, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. She froze when she saw me clutching a bright red crocodile skin bag to her chest, like a life preserver. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, trying to summon her old arrogance, but her voice wavered. "Get out, Aaliyah! This is my apartment. I am just packing my things before I go to a hotel. You have no right to be here." I didn't stop walking until I was standing right over her, looking down at the chaos she had created. I didn't feel the fear I used to feel in her presence. I didn't feel the need to apologize for existing. I felt cold, clear, and absolute. "No, Bianca," I said, my voice steady and devoid of any warmth. "This is not your apartment. It never was. The judge signed the order this morning. This property was purchased with funds from my trust. It belongs to me. It always did. You are the one who is trespassing." Bianca scrambled to her feet, clutching the bag tighter. "Look, Aaliyah, please be reasonable. I have nothing. Brad kicked me out. Mom and Dad are in jail getting processed. I just need a little cash to get a room for the night. These bags are worth thousands. I can sell them and get back on my feet. You do not even care about fashion. You do not need them. Just let me take them and I will go." She reached for another bag, trying to hoist it over her shoulder, but I stepped forward. Blocking her path, I looked at the bag's piles of leather that cost more than I had earned in 10 years. I thought about the nights I sat in the dark because I couldn't pay the electric bill while she was buying these with my money. "Put it down," I commanded. The authority in my voice surprised even me. "Put them all down right now. Those are not your personal items, Bianca. Those are assets purchased with embezzled funds that makes them evidence in a federal investigation, and more importantly, they were bought with my money." Bianca looked at me, tears streaming down her face, trying to play the victim one last time. "But I am your sister," she wailed. "You cannot send me out there with nothing. I am pregnant." I looked at her unmoved. "You should have thought about that before you spent 5 years stealing my future." I checked my watch, the cheap plastic one I had worn since culinary school. "You have exactly 10 minutes to get out of my house. You can take the clothes on your back and nothing else. Leave the bags, leave the jewelry, leave everything that was bought with the trust fund. If you are not out the door in 10 minutes, I am calling the detectives downstairs and adding grand larceny to your list of charges. Start walking." "Bianca, your time is up." Bianca stood in the center of the foyer, shivering in her slip. The mountain of designer bags lay abandoned on the floor, a monument to a life she could no longer afford. She looked small and pathetic, stripped of the arrogance that had defined her for as long as I could remember. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, her eyes pleading. "Aaliyah, please," she whimpered, her voice cracking. "Please do not kick me out on the street. It is raining. I have no money for a taxi. I have no friends who will pick up the phone right now. Everyone has blocked me. Just let me stay here. One night. That is all I am asking. I will sleep on the floor. I do not care. I just cannot be out there alone." I looked at her, and for a fleeting second I felt the old instinct to protect her, to fix her mess like I always did. But then I remembered the basement. I remembered the sound of rats scratching in the walls while she slept in silk sheets. I remembered the hunger cramps I endured while she threw away half-eaten lobster. I reached into my purse, but I did not pull out a credit card or a wad of cash. I pulled out a crumpled piece of paper stained with grease from the kitchen. I walked over to her and pressed the paper into her trembling hand. She looked down at it, hope flaring in her eyes, thinking it was a check or a voucher for a luxury hotel. When she read the address, her face fell. "What is this?" she asked, looking up at me confused. "That is the address to the studio apartment in the southside," I said, my voice calm and even. "It is the place I called home for the last year. Thanks to you and Mom and Dad. It is a basement unit. The heating is spotty and the radiator clanks all night. The shower only has hot water for 3 minutes, so you have to be fast. Oh, and you will want to keep your shoes on because the floor is always damp." Bianca looked at the paper as if it were infected with a disease. "You expect me to live there?" she whispered in horror. "Aaliyah, I am pregnant. I cannot live in a slum. I paid the rent for 1 month." I continued, ignoring her complaint. "It is more than you ever did for me. You have a roof over your head and a lock on the door. That is a luxury. Bianca, you have 30 days to figure out your life, to find a job, to learn what it actually costs to survive without stealing from family. Consider it a crash course in reality." She stared at me, her mouth open, unable to comprehend that I was not going to save her. I walked to the door and held it open, the cool hallway air rushing in. "You said you were a self-made success, Bianca," I said, gesturing to the hallway. "Now is your chance to prove it. Go make something of yourself, starting from zero, just like I had to." She walked out slowly, clutching the piece of paper like a lifeline. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. As she stepped into the elevator, she looked back one last time, expecting me to call her back. But I just watched her go. The doors slid shut, severing the tie between us completely. I locked the penthouse door, turned around, and finally, for the first time in 5 years, I felt like I was home. 2 days later, the sun was shining over the city, casting a golden glow on the water of Lake Michigan. I sat on a bench in the park with Grandpa Elijah, watching the boats drift by. The air felt different now, cleaner, lighter. The storm had passed, and the wreckage had been cleared away. Grandpa reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a pale blue envelope. He handed it to me, his hand steady and warm. I took it, feeling the weight of the paper inside. "I cannot give you back the 5 years they stole from you, baby girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I cannot take away the nights you went hungry or the pain of their betrayal. But I can give you the future you were supposed to have." I opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier check. The number made my breath catch in my throat. $500,000. It was the restitution from the seized assets, plus the interest and a generous addition from Grandpa's own accounts. It was enough to start over. It was enough to build a dream. "This is yours," he said simply. "No strings attached. No trustees. No middlemen. It is your capital, Aaliyah. Go build something real, something that belongs only to you." I hugged him, holding on tight, feeling the love that had skipped a generation. Then I stood up and walked straight to Le Jardin. I walked through the service entrance one last time, wearing my street clothes. I found Chef Marco screaming at a line cook about the garnish on the scallops. He stopped when he saw me, expecting me to grab an apron and get to work. "Aaliyah, you are late," he barked. "Get on the line. We are in the weeds." I shook my head, smiling a smile that felt like sunshine breaking through clouds. "No, chef," I said, my voice ringing clear over the clatter of pots and pans. "I am not getting on the line. I am not washing another dish, and I am certainly not cooking another steak for you." I quit. The kitchen went silent. I turned and walked out, leaving the heat and the shouting behind me. 3 months later, I stood on a quiet corner in the West Loop, watching a painter finish the gold lettering on the window of a beautiful brick building. The smell of fresh bread and simmering spices drifted out the open door. My staff was inside prepping for the soft opening, laughing and talking with the respect I had always craved but never received. I looked up at the sign above the door. The letters caught the afternoon light, shining brilliantly. The Phoenix. It was perfect. I had burned to ash in the fire of my family's greed, but I had risen. I was the owner. I was the head chef. And for the first time in my life, I was free. I pushed open the door to my restaurant, ready to feed the world on my own terms, the heat in. The kitchen of the Phoenix was different from the stifling, oppressive heat at Le Jardin. Here the air crackled with creativity and respect, not fear. It was a Friday night, exactly 1 year since the day my family had been arrested, and the dining room was packed to capacity. The sounds of the service were a symphony. I had composed the rhythmic chopping of knives against wood, the sizzle of searing scallops, and the synchronized chorus of "Yes, Chef" that followed my every command. I stood at the pass, wiping a smudge of sauce from the rim of a plate, inspecting every dish that left the kitchen, with an obsessive eye for detail. Tonight was not just a busy service, it was a coronation. Earlier that afternoon, a representative from the Michelin Guide had walked through the front door and handed me a plaque that changed everything. 1 star. It was the validation I had been told I would never achieve. The industry had recognized what my grandfather had seen in me all along, that I was an artist, not a servant. I walked out into the dining room after the rush had subsided, still wearing my chef whites to greet the guests. A hush fell over the room, followed by a ripple of applause. It was intoxicating. I wasn't the invisible dishwasher anymore, or the poor relation in the hand-me-down dress. I was Chef Aaliyah, king owner of the hottest restaurant in Chicago. Grandpa Elijah was sitting at his usual table in the corner, a copy of Bon Appetit magazine propped up against his wineglass. He was beaming, pointing at the cover for anyone who walked by to see. On the glossy front page was a photo of me taken last month, looking fierce and regal in my custom jacket, holding a knife with a look of absolute confidence. The headline read, "The Phoenix Rises. How Aaliyah King Turned Betrayal into a Culinary Empire." I walked over and kissed his cheek, feeling the tears prick my eyes. He tapped the magazine cover with his finger. "Look at you, baby girl," he said, his voice rough with pride. "You are not just a boss lady anymore. You are a queen. They said you were nothing. They said you were a failure. But look at who is smiling on the newsstand." Now I looked at the photo, at the woman who looked back at me with strength and defiance. I hardly recognized her sometimes. She was miles away from the girl who used to cry in the basement. She was powerful, she was wealthy, and most importantly, she was free. I looked around the beautiful restaurant, the amber lighting reflecting off the wine glasses, and felt a deep, abiding peace. I had built this stone by stone, plate by plate, and no one could ever take it away from me again. The phone on my mahogany desk buzzed with a jarring mechanical ring cutting through the soft jazz playing in my office. I looked at the caller ID. It was a restricted number, followed by the automated voice I had come to dread but no longer feared. You have a prepaid call from an inmate at the Federal Correctional Institution in Pekin. Will you accept the charges? I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the decline button. It had been 6 months since I last spoke to them. The trial was over. The sentencing was done. They were gone, locked away in a world of concrete and steel far removed from my life of luxury. But today, feeling the weight of the Michelin star and the success of the anniversary, I felt a sudden urge to hear them, to hear the contrast between their world and mine. I pressed accept. Aaliyah, is that you? The voice was my mother Latoya's, but it was unrecognizable. It was thin, shrill and desperate, stripped of all its pretension. Aaliyah, thank God you picked up. We have been calling for weeks. Why have not you answered? I leaned back in my leather chair, swiveling to look out the window at the city skyline creating a silhouette against the night sky. I have been busy. Mother, running a business takes time. Something you wouldn't know about since you never actually worked. Don't be like that, she whined, her voice trembling. It is terrible in here, Aaliyah. The food is inedible. It is slop, and the commissary prices are criminal. Your father and I, we need money. We need to buy soap, we need snacks, we need phone credits to call the lawyer for the appeal. Please, Aaliyah, just send a few $100s. You have so much now. We saw the magazine in the library. You are rich. You owe us this after everything we did for you. I listened to her beg, listening to the entitlement that still clung to her like a disease, even behind bars. She still thought she was owed something. She still thought I was her resource. Put Dad on, I said quietly. There was a rustling sound, and then my father. Desmond's voice came on the line, hoarse and broken. Aaliyah, listen to your mother. We are suffering in here. We are family. You cannot let us rot like this. Send the money. Aaliyah, just write the check. I looked down at the weekly profit report on my desk. The numbers were staggering. The Phoenix had made more in 1 month than they had stolen in a year. I picked up a pen, tapping it rhythmically against the paper. I hear you. Dad? I said, my voice cool and smooth, like polished glass. I hear that you are hungry. I hear that you are uncomfortable. And honestly, I think that is exactly what you need. You spent 5 years eating my food, spending my money, and living my life. It is time you paid the bill. Aaliyah, wait! He shouted, panic rising in his voice. Don't hang up. We need this. I smiled, a slow, satisfied smile that they couldn't see. I am sorry, I said softly, leaning into the receiver. The subscriber you have dialed is currently busy counting her money. Please try again. Never. I hung up the phone, severing the connection with a satisfying click. The silence that followed was not empty, it was full of promise. I turned back to my work, the city lights twinkling below me, leaving the darkness where it belonged in the past. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the windshield of my brand new Range Rover. It was the kind of cold, biting rain that seeped into your bones, the kind I used to walk through every single day on my way to the bus stop back when I was invisible. But today I was warm inside a cabin that smelled of fresh leather and success. The heated seat was comfortable against my back, and the soft hum of the engine was the only sound accompanying the rhythmic swipe of the wipers. I turned the corner onto Michigan Avenue, driving slowly through the puddles, watching the city blur past in streaks of gray and neon. Up ahead, the bus shelter was a miserable island of concrete in the storm. It was crowded with people huddled together, trying to escape the spray of passing cars. I slowed down for the red light, my gaze drifting idly over the crowd. And then I saw her. She was standing a little apart from the others, as if even in her misery she could not quite blend in. It was Bianca. But it was not the Bianca of private jets and Porsche Cayennes. She was wearing a shapeless gray jumpsuit with the logo of a commercial cleaning service stitched onto the chest. her hair once her crowning glory, was pulled back in a messy frizzy bun, and she looked exhausted. Her face was gaunt, her makeup non-existent, and she was shivering, clutching a thin jacket around herself as the wind whipped the rain into the shelter. For a moment I felt a phantom twinge in my chest, a ghost of the old Aaliyah who would have pulled over, who would have given her a ride, who would have emptied her wallet to fix her sister's problem. But then I looked at her hands. They were red and chapped rough from scrubbing floors and wringing out mops. They were exactly like my hands used to look when she called me a peasant, as if she felt my gaze. Bianca looked up. Her eyes locked onto the sleek black SUV, and then they found me behind the glass. Recognition dawned on her face, followed instantly by a desperate, pitiful hope. She took a step forward toward the curb, the rain soaking her instantly. She raised a hand, half waving, half begging, her mouth forming my name. She looked like a drowning woman, reaching for a lifeline, expecting me to save her because that is what I had always done. I sat there while the light remained red, watching her wet face crumble. The old me would have felt guilty. The new me felt nothing but a cool, detached sense of justice. She was finally living the life she had sentenced me to. She was finally learning the lesson Grandpa Elijah had tried to teach us all those years ago. I did not roll down the window. I did not unlock the doors. Instead, I reached into the center console and pulled out my oversized designer sunglasses, sliding them onto my face, shielding my eyes from her need. I looked up at the rearview mirror, adjusting it slightly so I could see my own reflection. I saw a woman who had survived. I saw a woman who owed nothing to anyone. The light turned green. Bianca took another step forward, her expression turning to shock as she realized I wasn't stopping. I pressed my foot gently on the accelerator. The car surged forward, smooth and powerful, kicking up a spray of water that splashed against the curb right where she was standing. I did not look back. I did not check the side mirror to see her reaction. I just drove, staring straight ahead into my future. For years they told me that family was everything, that I had to sacrifice my happiness to keep the peace. But I learned the hard way that they were wrong. Family is not about whose blood runs in your veins. It is not about a last name or a shared history. Family is about respect. It is about loyalty. It is about who stands by you when the world falls apart. And looking at the empty road ahead, I realized I had finally found the one person who would never betray me again. I had chosen my new family, myself. This story teaches us a powerful lesson about self-worth and boundaries. We often believe that we must endure toxic behavior simply because it comes from family, but Aaliyah's journey proves that loyalty should never come at the cost of your dignity. You cannot set yourself on fire just to keep others warm. True success is built on integrity and hard work, while greed and entitlement eventually lead to ruin. The most important relationship you will ever have is the one with yourself, and sometimes choosing peace means walking away from the people who share your blood. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more emotional tales.